Hi, all. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Catherine Stewart, Principal and Policy and Insights Team Lead London at Economist Impact. And today's session is around the business case for diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially in times of recession. In light of the current economic downturn, many companies may be considering reducing their DEI budgets. But what's the cost of actually doing that? Putting DEI front and center has proven itself to be an effective means to enable businesses to thrive and be more resilient. Today, I'll be discussing why DEI is critical for future-proofing your workforce and how to strengthen DEI in your organization with Rebecca Tabor-Stalen, Co-Chief Executive at Merit America, Lori Chamberlain, Head of LHH Recruitment Solutions at the Adecco Group, and Cynthia Overton, Director of Tech Workplace Initiatives at the Capor Foundation. Before we get into a discussion around DEI, I first want to think about how businesses view their workforces. Lori, what benefit do companies get when their primary lens for their employees is as people, not as workers?
I think it's a dangerous thing for organizations to really think about an employee as a widget in a factory versus somebody who has an authentic self that is just as impacted by economic and social conditions as they are. And I have read a number of business books and a couple that I highly recommend, The Heart of Business by Hubert Joly and The Happiness Advantage by Sean Achor. And both of these books say it doesn't matter what your organization is or does, if you don't tap into the heart of your people and why they're there every day, no business strategy is really going to be sustainably successful.
So, to follow up on that, Rebecca and Cynthia, I want to come to you about what are the key questions and principles that companies and organizations should be putting in place to have a people first centered approach to their employees. Rebecca, do you want to start us off?
Absolutely. Well, I couldn't agree with Lori more. I think that the businesses that are going to win the war of talent, that are going to thrive in a changing economy, whether that's recession or technological disruptions, are those that put their people first. And that commitment to DEI as part of that can't just be a check the box activity. It has to be leadership buy-in at the very top level to say, we are not investing in DEI because of all the many case studies that show it's going to, improve our bottom line and make our teams more productive. We're doing it because we have a vision for what our company can and should be and the change we can create in this world. And being an excellent place to work that models the values of social justice, that tackles systemic racism, is part of who we want to be. And we know that Gen Z and the workforce at large are looking for that in their companies. They're looking for leaders and environments who take a stand, who are willing to speak out against injustice, and are willing to build workplaces that not just drive bottom lines and create shareholder value, but become places where people can build thriving careers and tackle some of the systemic inequities we see in the broader world.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that it's really important for organizations to think about where they want to be. And to Rebecca's point, really understanding the change in demographics. Here in the United States, I think it's by 2045, people of color will be in the majority. So it's really important, I think, to consider where you want to be. What does your workforce look like now? And what do you need to do in order to get to where you want to be in the future so that you can keep up with the changing and evolving needs of your consumer base?
Lori, have you ever seen any good examples of practices that companies are taking to start to embrace this and to really think first about people, and within thinking about people, thinking about DEI and people's kind of natural diversity, making sure the real population of a country, of a city, is represented in the workforce?
I've seen great examples, and because our company works with so many different companies, I don't want to speak out of turn without their permission, although it's good press from my perspective. But I've seen financial institutions that don't just talk the talk, they walk the walk, and they really look at, are we representative of the communities we're serving, whether that's from a gender perspective, whether that is from a racial perspective. They want to make sure, as an example, if they want to open up new operations where multilingual is the most important thing. So really, I've been thoroughly impressed by that financial institution committing to the reasons why it ties in, that they really want financial health for every community, not just the wealthiest of Americans, but also um, populations that are underserved that could really change the dynamic and the economic footprint of the United States and the individuals in those communities themselves. And so that is a shining example I've seen. Just recently, we were doing workshops within our own organization, and we had 3 chairs at the front of the room. And 1 chair was for our colleagues, 1 chair was for our candidates, and 1 chair was for our clients. And everything that we talked about, we went back to, does this help or hurt the 3 people at the front of the room? And do we have a B2C mentality all the time, regardless of if we're in a B2B operation? And there's numerous other examples, but I'm sure that Cynthia and Rebecca have some as well, so I don't want to hog the floor.
Well, I just really want to add to that, and I think that you make excellent points. And just to piggyback on that, our organization, the Kapor Center, was founded by a couple, Mitch and Frida Kapor. They just released a book called Closing the Equity Gap. And in the book that they found that, or excuse me, the book, they explain how they invested in companies that actually close opportunity gaps for people from low income backgrounds and for people of color. And they attribute the lived experiences and the distance traveled of the company's founders, as the key factors in success of their companies. And as a result, their venture capital firm is among the highest performing of their size when it comes to financial returns.
And I'll just chime in as well. When we talk about closing the opportunity gap, one thing we talk a lot about at Merit America is degree discrimination. So requiring a bachelor's degree for a job that shouldn't actually require a bachelor's degree. There's nothing specific to the BA that is going to be needed or used in the job. It is just a way of actually furthering inequities, given that we know the folks in America who are more likely to get a bachelor's degree are those who have family wealth and are less likely to be from marginalized communities. So we've worked with some amazing employers, JP Morgan Chase, Amazon, Infosys, who are removing college degree requirements and hiring based on skills, not degrees, both because it levels the playing field, because we know that when you discriminate based on a BA, you actually lock out the vast majority of Black and Latinx talent in our country. And because if you don't have a strategy for how you're going to evaluate the 53 million people who are working but don't have a BA, you don't really have a comprehensive talent strategy. So that's something our advisor shares. And we believe so fully that to win the war on talent, you're going to have to think about how to knock down those barriers and look at all talent.
And I would just love to interject really quickly, Rebecca. I love that so much. And another thing that we're looking at with organizations is, are they ready to onboard people where maybe somebody in the family is the first person to get a college degree, but maybe this is the first person in the family, they don't have a degree, but they're the first person to enter a quote unquote professional workforce with a career track to leadership and management, but they don't have anybody that's ever coached them on the rules of the road of corporate America. So we're even encouraging organizations that are hiring a new population of potential colleagues. Get ready to onboard these people for success, and don't assume they know some of the customs of your organization and how are you going to help them be successful once they get in the door. So taking that a step further, not just no degree is required, and that's a great first step, but then when they come in, help them know, yeah, you've got to return every phone call, and maybe we don't approach emails with text language. We need formal English because it might go to a client. Those are really little things that can make a massive difference in whether somebody's successful or not.
So we've kind of ironed out the cost of education, especially higher education, being potentially prohibitive to driving equitable outcomes. You mentioned, Lori, that if you haven't been part of a family of professionals, that can be a challenge. Are there other changes that need to happen within workplaces to ensure that more people have access to social and economic mobility? Um, any one of you who wants to hop in on that, please.
What we really see is again, it starts at the top. It starts with this visceral buy-in from the leader that their job as a company is to manifest a better world and to model the values that they want to see in the world. And that then has to permeate everything from how you hire, breaking down barriers, looking at skills, not degrees, how you onboard, making sure people know the unwritten rules of the workplace, how you promote, develop, compensate, and retain. And the exciting thing, since this is about the business case for DEI, is the companies that are doing this work are having a faster time to hire. They're retaining their workers longer. They're showing increased productivity. So when you actually put in that work up front, it is an investment, but it's not a long-term investment. It's not something you have to sit on for 5 to 10 years. You will see immediate gains in the access to talent, in the loyalty of the talent, in the retention of individuals. At Merit America, we've placed thousands of talented, diverse workers in amazing companies. And we hear from our company partners that they were easier to hire because they had such a great pipeline of talent. They stay longer, they perform better, because when you're making that shift from a lower wage job, not lower skill, but lower wage, into the first rung of a upwardly mobile career path, there's a lot of excitement and interest in sticking it out and making it work for the long run, perhaps more so than, someone who's just out of college and hasn't quite figured out what it is they want to do with their life.
So I just want to pick up on what Rebecca was talking about when it comes to the importance of leadership at the top buying into DEI initiatives. A lot of times there's so much emphasis and pressure for actual DEI leaders when it's really organizational leaders and senior leaders that we need to be looking to lead these efforts and carry this forward. Senior leaders need to understand what's happening under their watch, whether it's during the interview process, the hiring process, throughout their unit pay equity, performance reviews, and so on. And there's one study that found that 54% of managers say that leadership is out of touch with employees. And on top of this, 74% of managers say that they just don't have the influence or resources to make change for employees. So it's really important for senior leaders to be present and aware. And we have to keep in mind that the workplace is small, and we're part of or the workplace is part of a small part of a bigger, broader society that has just really created so many barriers for women, for people of color. I know that this is something that we don't like to talk about. It can be really hard to acknowledge if you haven't faced these barriers, right? It can be tough to deal with and navigate if you are on the receiving end of these barriers. So in order to keep, DEI really at the top of a workforce strategy and make sure that, you have a place where everybody can succeed, it's really important for leaders to reflect on their own approach to leadership and how they're either perpetuating, upholding, or hopefully, dismantling these legacy practices that have disadvantaged certain populations. I would say that business leaders should then turn to the DEI leaders to really make adjustments in their approach. And I just want to also kind of acknowledge that, change, especially when you're talking about changes that an individual needs to make, change can be really hard. My doctor tells me that I need to eat better and that I need to exercise more. I want ice cream for dinner and I want a nap for dessert. But you can't always do what's convenient and comfortable if you want to do what's right.
I think, Cynthia, I would completely echo that. I think that relying on a DEI leader to control and really navigate the entire DEI strategy for an organization is like asking one person to lead the culture of a company. It's just not possible, and it happens at a grassroots level, and it can even be as simple as asking questions of, what holidays do you want us to acknowledge, colleagues? We acknowledge the 4th of July, but what else do you want us to acknowledge? And what are we missing and what's important? And asking questions about the there's things that are happening every day. This last weekend, there were 3 teenagers that were shot. And so how are different communities navigating how they feel about that? Because that hits close to home for a lot of families. And we have to acknowledge those things. So sometimes we're not going to get it right. We're not going to be perfect. But again, if you're looking at DEI, not necessarily from again, check the box. I think, Rebecca, you're the one who said that earlier, but you're looking at it from, we're a human society. And if COVID taught us anything, interconnectivity with each other really, really matters. And so just treating every single person in your organization as having thoughts and feelings and contributions. And sometimes just even saying, hey, how are you doing? I know you have a teenage son, that age, that demographic. Are you sleeping at night? Just even having that conversation, that simple conversation and acknowledgement can sometimes say to that person, this company cares about me. And that just feels better. And I feel better. And I can actually feel like I can get back to work rather than I'm a second self in the workplace and I'm having a hard day and I have to pretend that I'm not having a hard day. And it actually gets people back to work. And it's that tiny and that simple. But Cynthia, I totally agree. Asking one person to lead a DEI initiative for the entire organization is it's impossible for that person. It's everybody's responsibility.
I think this is a really good point then to segue obviously into one of the big challenges that we're going to try and conquer in this discussion today, which is given shifts in the economic climate. We're in a recession over here in the UK. There's been discussion of, will the US hit a recession? How do we make sure? How do companies make sure? How do stakeholders within companies make sure that DEI strategies and initiatives remain at the top of the agenda when there is potentially budget cuts? Rebecca, do you want to start us off on trying to answer what is clearly a very heavy, hefty question?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, again, we know the data is there that investing in DEI pays off. Again, it is the right thing to do and should be done regardless. But the great news is it has a real and material business impact. But also, it's not just that long term payoff. In the short term, you can reduce your time to hire, you can increase retention, you can increase productivity. And so, especially in times of economic uncertainty, companies can't afford not to invest in DEI because of the importance to the business and to the team and work culture they're trying to build. So again, we see all the time companies from, I realize I actually just, even as we are batting down the hatches in different parts of the business, this is a great way to make sure that we have the talent we need to weather any storms, to companies saying that this is an amazing opportunity to invest in the upskilling of different groups of employees, both within and without our company, to make sure that we're really well positioned on the other end of this to take hold of new opportunities. We're about to go through one of the biggest technological disruptions of our entire lives with the advent of artificial intelligence and everything that's coming down the line. And so the leaders who invest now, the leaders who do it both because of the immediate business benefit and the long-term business benefit, are the ones who are going to be on top when any economic uncertainty is over.
So when we think about the business case for diversity, I think that it's a really interesting framing and a very interesting perspective held by a lot of organizations. And I say it's interesting because in some ways it acknowledges a willingness to default to a business case for legacy workplace practices that foster disparities and don't reflect society when we know, like I said before, that the demographics of our country are changing. By 2045, people of color will make up more than half of the population in the US. Companies should really be thinking about their future, about the evolving needs of consumers. We also know that DEI is important to job seekers, as I think that Rebecca was mentioning before. There was one survey that found that 76% of job seekers and employees report that a diverse workforce is an important factor when evaluating companies and job offers. Yes, in tech, the area where I'm mainly focused, and in some other industries, hiring is, being pulled back now because of the downturn. However, companies will come back, and hiring will come back, and employers need to be ready. We also need to think about decision making. We've all heard about the McKinsey study showing that diverse workforces yield higher returns. But there's another really interesting study that looks at jury deliberation that sheds lights on the importance of diverse teams. And in that study, on average, diverse jury teams deliberated 11 minutes longer. They discussed more facts about the case. They made fewer factual errors, and they were more open to talking about the role of race than all white juries. So I'd really say that we should, reject the business case for legacy practices that foster disparities and excludes or disadvantages certain populations, and really focus on opportunities for business alignment with DEI.
I
So
totally
Cynthia,
agree with both my peers. Can I just throw in one more thing? I think that one thing I see when budget cuts are happening to DEI programs is companies that haven't figured out why DEI is important to them. So they get on kind of a bandwagon and throw a lot of money at the issue with a lot of donations to DEI organizations outside their own organization. And so that's what they want to cut because they don't even understand how they're getting a return from that. And so I would argue a lot of the companies that are thinking DEI is an economic decision are the ones that haven't really figured out why they have a DEI program. But the ones that have embedded it into their culture, even if they were giving meaningful donations, they might cut back on some of those meaningful donations, but their workforce is so committed to DEI. So in our own organization, as an example, we have a partnership with Dress for Success that we regularly do clothing drives to help women, especially those in disadvantaged populations, have clothing to go to that first interview where they feel empowered to have a right to be in the room. And we do resume workshops and we do all kinds of things. And this is a complete volunteer basis of our workforce because it's embedded in our culture. So we might not be able to write as big of checks in economic downturns, but we do other things that are in kind to organizations that we adore and sponsor and believe in. And our colleagues don't even think twice. They want to do something. What can we do? And so I totally agree with Rebecca and Cynthia, but I would also argue that some of the organizations that think it's an economic decision haven't figured it out why they're even doing it.
So it sounds
And
to
I'll just
me,
add on there. I think the
yeah, go
best
ahead, Rebecca.
the best DEI strategies are talent strategies. They're strategies that look at what's in the water of the company and re-examine and say, how do we build an equitable and inclusive workplace where no matter what background you're from, you can thrive. And so to say, we don't have time to invest in DI, saying we don't have time to invest in talent. There's so much that you can do that has minimal cost and such a high return. And I think we all agree that a company that says, oh, we're just going to, cut all of our most talented people because we don't have time for it in a downturn will not be successful when the downturn is over.
Right. So it sounds like we, as a group, you two have you've put forward two real points for people to take away. The first is that if you are not thinking about DI as key to attracting and retaining core talent and growing your business, no matter what the economic circumstances, you're thinking incorrectly about this issue. And the second, Cynthia, if I understood your point correctly, is actually this is not a business case. It shouldn't be put with a business case. A business case traditionally has been a factor of exclusion. And instead, we should be reorienting the way we think about business cases more broadly to be people-centered and equity-centered instead. Did I get that right?
Hmm?
Yes,
So
Yes.
I guess with that in mind, I want to talk through the relationship that partnerships can play. And obviously we have, you're from a foundation, Cynthia. We have two private sector representatives. Laura, you've already talked about some of the relationships that your organization has with some nonprofits and charities. But what role do partnerships play, and what needs to occur between the private sector and the public sector to carve out pathways that can actually lead to change? Laurie, do you want to start us off?
I think Rebecca talking about whether a degree is required, there is a shift happening in our country right now on the importance of degrees and whether upskilling programs and boot camps for coding or whether apprenticeships have a kind of a different connotation in the U.S. than they do in Europe. But there's a big push for on-job learning and what can we do to really help people enter the workforce from a combination of our communities, our government, and whether that's the local government or the federal government, and then private sector, because we all are seeing that even this recession is tricky because unemployment is still very, very low for skilled labor. And you can qualify skilled labor however you want. You can look at it as a marketing professional, an IT professional, but we are having to change how people work, and there is a workforce that is willing and able to work, but they need the skills that might not go through traditional routes. And so, how can you turn a marketing professional that might have done something that was providing swag for events into a digital marketer with a boot camp, with a different kind of career pathing, and keeping that person current? And so there's all kinds of programs that exist, and I think that people have to be open-minded, that the workforce isn't so linear anymore, that you either go this route, you get your high school diploma and your GED and you go kind of into a trade route, or you get your degree and you go into a professional route. I think the lines are completely blurring. I think the gig economy is helping that, but we've got to get a bunch of what I'll call the traditional employers looking at the diversity of opportunities in front of them to expand their workforce or to remobilize their workforce.
And I
Rebecca,
think,
come in, tell us what you
Yeah.
see.
great. Well, your question was about partnerships and why they matter. And I think it actually ties really well to the last question about, investing and spending on this in times of economic uncertainty. And the funny thing is, I think this idea that this work is expensive comes from folks thinking they have to do it all themselves. When in reality, there are so many partners who can actually help you meet these goals, change the culture, build the vision, live the values, and often in a way that again is saving money versus spending money. So Merit America, for example, we work with companies that say, I'm ready to remove the college degree requirement for at least some of my roles. I want to do skills-based hiring. But if I do that on, just my public job posting, I might be inundated. We know there are 53 million talented people who are stuck in low-wage work who don't have college degrees. And how do I, as an employer new to this work, value 10 years of experience at a call center versus 10 years of experience in retail? And so that's where partners like Merit America come in, where we are a nonprofit and we are vetting, preparing, and placing a pipeline of thousands, soon to be tens of thousands of diverse candidates into these new roles, so that you don't have to figure out, well, how do I work my way through all the applicants? How do I make sure they've got the technical and professional skills they need to be day one ready? How do I make sure they grow, they understand those unwritten rules of work that Lori shared? And so the biggest message I want to share is, if you're excited about this work, if you're bought in, but you're not sure where to start, there are so many great partners out there who can help you, and often in a way that is, again, saving money versus spending money.
Before I come over to you, Cynthia, I want to ask Rebecca, as a nonprofit organization, what would you like to see from the public sector? So, whether that's local government, national government, as a support system to help drive this change even more?
We talk a lot about how the college degree has unfortunately become the key to unlocking the American dream, where we've started to say, if instead of if you work hard, you can get ahead, it's if you work hard and you have a college degree, you can get ahead. And so for us to move that, we need to build a functioning and flourishing workforce development system that is as robust as the higher education system in this country. And it might be crazy to think about that because we have so many colleges, so much funding, so many options for financing, so many ways to understand quality of higher ed. But a century ago, that wasn't the case. A century ago, the vast majority of Americans didn't even have a high school degree. So we've been able to, over the course of decades, build a system of not just high school education, but post-secondary education. And we need to do the same with workforce, where we are looking at workforce development organizations, Merit America, boot camps, community colleges, other nonprofit training programs, and able to both have quality standards of what is a good program, what is delivering a high ROI, where the money in is leading to job placements and wage gains out, and then aligning funding, all of these state and federal government funding that is currently going primarily to higher education to also being open to high quality workforce programs as well.
So, Cindy, I want to pose a similar question to you around what role do you see public-private partnerships playing? And also then, what would you like to see change in those public-private partnerships over the next maybe year, 5 years? Where do we need to go?
I mean,
Not
I
a
would
big question
say
at all.
yeah, no, I would say better alignment. The tech industry has very close and cozy relationships with certain top elite schools. They're able to inform the schools of what their needs are so that they can align their curriculum. They're able to, create pathways for relationships and, of course, internship opportunities. And I would love to see tech companies and other organizations reach out to traditionally untapped talent because, as has been said before, there are people out there willing, ready, able to work. However, they need, the inside information. They need the relationships. They don't have the social capital. And so I would really love to see more alignment between the tech industry and traditionally undertapped sources of talent or places of talent. I do want to just also say that the KPOR Center partnered with Opportunity at Work to create an apprenticeship toolkit. So I know that we've been talking about apprenticeships, which can be an interesting and fruitful pathway into workplace opportunities. So that's available online and free to use. And I'd also recommend checking out the KPOR Center's Equitable Tech Policy Initiatives, which identifies 9 policy areas that are really core to our efforts to help diversify and build a more equitable tech ecosystem and tech industry.
Cynthia, I'm curious, and I'll make a statement, and then I'll ask you a question. I am affiliated with a group called General Assembly GA, and they are part of the LHH portfolio, and they do upskilling and boot camps. And they've recently really gotten into what is called either a recruit, train, deploy model, the RTD model, or hire, train, deploy model. And more organizations are looking at how do we get near ready talent that have the aptitude and the attitude for the job, but need the skill set and then need ongoing support in the organization. So let's say company A says, I've got this initiative. I need 30 people that have this kind of coding background. And so they'll go to GA. GA will hire the 30 individuals. Some of these people were subway workers. Some of these people were working in the hospitality industry, but they had the attitude and aptitude to upskill themselves and to go through the boot camp. The company and GA help subsidize this boot camp so that they're not having to pay for it out of pocket. And then they're going into these organizations, and GA and other organizations like them then provide ongoing support from those instructors and those leaders so that the burden is not on the company for, okay, we've got people who know enough to be dangerous on coding, but somebody's going to have to keep answering their questions to really get this project going and off the ground. But these engagements can really be a year-long engagement of not only the education, but the placement in an organization for some period of time that then launches them for other opportunities once that engagement is over. And Cynthia, again, I'm not from the IT world in particular, but I work with a lot of IT customers. But are you seeing more and more organizations look at this kind of RTD, HTD model as a way to get people into these career paths?
Yeah, and I am seeing some movement on that. I would say that one of the things that I am concerned about and want to make sure is that people are getting opportunities to actually work for companies as opposed to being contract workers, because we know that contract workers don't have the same pay, benefits, protections as full-time employees. So we're seeing movement. Of course, I would love to be able to see more movement when it comes to these programs that are upskilling and training. There's another organization that does this and does this well, called Career Karma, and they actually work with different boot camps and helps users identify the best fit for them, and supports provide support in that way. So yeah, I mean, I think that it's very promising. I think that there is a lot of opportunity, though, when it comes to tech companies and other organizations understanding and appreciating the skills that come with this, because oftentimes there's such a focus on pedigree and unearned privileges sometimes.
No, I hear you. And one thing I just want to share that I have seen, and I've been in staffing since 1999, so a long time. And I can tell you, in the last 3 to 5 years, we have seen a shift with not only the gig worker, but with COVID and with portable health insurance, that some people are actually choosing temporary employee, in particular the nursing industry, that they have more control over their schedule and they actually have better pay. And so some industries, just to give you some comfort, there are some industries where temping is a choice because it is actually more lucrative and more control for the individual worker. And we're trying to catch up to that mentality because for a long time, I agree with you that temporary workers didn't necessarily get that foot in the door for a career perspective and have that career trajectory. But we're seeing less and less from both the employer side and the employee side.
That's
So
awesome.
just to give you some comfort that it's shifting.
Rebecca, I want to go to you. Obviously, Lori and Cynthia have just had a very interesting exchange, specifically around the tech industry. As your organization is working to place workers, what industries are you seeing shifting more quickly towards being more open-minded about degrees, about who they're bringing into the organization?
Well, we're definitely seeing that tech roles, because it's so clear often for these tech roles what the skills are that you need on day one, that you need to grow into, what the career ladder is. That tech roles seem to be a great wedge for non-traditional talent into, again, that first rung of an upwardly mobile career ladder. But here's the thing that we see, which is those tech roles are everywhere. They are not just in tech companies. They're in financial institutions, in healthcare institutions. Every company right now, with government, every company is a tech company. So we are seeing across the board companies, nonprofits, governments looking to hire non-traditional talent and realizing that it's a skill, it's a muscle to build. But if they build it, then the talent will come.
It's very
One
filled with
other thing I would
dreams.
just add for anybody else on this call who has had teenagers or has soon to be teenagers, that they are developing a lot of these coding skills that are transferable with a little bit of formalization of how that coding might work in a business setting. But the things that they're building in the Minecrafts of the world, they are coding, whether they know it or not. They've got these coding skills that are transferable, and it's really, really interesting. You spend a couple of days with organizations like Girls Who Code. It's phenomenal what these kids are gaining from growing up with these kinds of games. And for those of us that did not grow up with this, that think they're spending too much time on these video games or online, they are actually picking up skill sets that are transferable in today's marketplace.
I think then that raises a really interesting question around, are these new kind of policies, practices, focuses only really benefiting younger populations moving into the workforce? Or are there opportunities for older people who perhaps didn't grow up in the Minecraft era, but who are trying to break out of some of these systems that prevent social and economic equality? Laura, I see
I'll
you
take that one
nodding.
because that,
Oh, Rebecca, go. Please go.
yeah, well, at Merit America, there's sometimes this assumption that because we help people get into, high paying entry level roles in demand fields, that it must be younger folks. But our average age is actually in the 30s. We've served up to 72 years old. We have no age requirements. And what we find actually is a lot of times these learners who are coming to us with decades of experience, there's just a small jump they need to make from where they are into this new career. And that's something that you can then deliver in a way that they don't have to quit their day jobs while they learn. They don't have to take out massive amounts of debt. It's going to be months, not years or decades. And we can help them make a transition that will not only change their lives, but the lives of their children, their young children, and their communities overall. So we are really excited to see this happening at all ages, especially because a recent data point we learned is that it'll take 30 years for someone without a college degree to equal the wages of someone graduating from college. And there is no world in which we all in America value a college degree at 30 years of lived work experience. And so there's something really messed up in the market right now. But that mistake, that flaw, is an opportunity because there are people with decades of experience who are able to transition and skill and upskill for these great new careers and are going to be some of the best employees for the companies that can hire them.
I think
Laura, you
there's
see
also
you.
some so I already talked about Dress for Success, and a lot of times those are women who have been in either abusive relationships or have been caregivers or have had a variety of things that have prevented them from being in the workplace. And so they are a demographic that I believe they have a lot of what I would call near ready talent. They've been able to keep an entire ecosystem, maybe their entire apartment building going during COVID, like the things that they've been able to do, and just getting them to be able to articulate how does that work in a workforce setting from a project management perspective, because a lot of them just don't know how to tell their story of how what they've been doing all along is relevant to the workplace, and they need a helping hand on that. The second group that I see a lot of success with, and these aren't the only two groups, there's plenty of groups, but retiring military. And there's a lot of veterans that they've only ever known the military. And so when they come out of the military, we're a proud sponsor of military spouses and veterans. And they have phenomenal transferable skills. But again, they don't feel like they've got a story. They've been in the military world. They speak a military language, and being able to help them tell their story of how those skills are incredibly transferable. Working well as a team, very coachable, big learners, can handle high risk situations. All the things that I don't need to go into now. Like I'm trying to help you all prep for an interview, but the reality is a lot of these retiring veterans, they're not ready to do nothing. They want to do something. They just don't know what, and they don't know where to start. So I do think that it's way beyond the gamers coming up that are in our households.
Cynthia, how does the Capor Foundation interact with kind of people of all generations? Is it mainly young people? Or are you also seeing similarities to what Rebecca and Lori have been seeing? What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I mean, tech, I would say just overall is there are a lot of younger folks that tend to be in tech. We're a racial justice organization that takes an intersectional approach. So I would say that the folks who participate in our programming, while most are a little earlier in their career, we do see interest, and I love to see interest from folks who are of probably have more years of experience under their belts.
So moving us away a little bit from um, ages, how this is working, I want to turn everyone's attention to something we've referenced earlier in the conversation, but haven't spent a ton of time talking about yet, which is what role does diversity, equity, and inclusion play in shifting and allowing organizations to meet new business needs. So if you're an organization looking out for your 3, 5, 10-year plan, what should you be thinking about in terms of the role that DEI can play to help you get there? Rebecca, do you want to start us off maybe?
Sure. I heard someone say the other day, all this worry about AI is going to take your job. AI is not going to take your job. Someone who knows how to use AI is going to take your job. And I think that's really important because again, we're going to see massive shifts in the world of work and the economy. And that provides a real opportunity for businesses who approach it with the right mindset instead of saying, oh, great, I'm going to take my white male seasoned engineers and put them through an upskilling program to help them compete in the changing economy. I'm going to identify the needs that we are going to have as a company and create pathways where anyone, both within and outside of the company, can get the skills they need to help us accelerate our mission and our work and succeed amidst these changes. And so that DEI lens, thinking that or realizing that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not, will actually help businesses that are looking to adapt, that are looking to change core practices, auxiliary practices, whatever it might be, realize that there's an immense pool of talent both within their company and outside of it that might not look the way they normally think of as the talent for these opportunities. But if they can build those pathways, if they can reduce and eliminate the biases and the systems that hold marginalized communities back, they're going to have a massive pool of talent that will enable them to be successful.
I was just going to say, so I love Rebecca's nonprofit lens, and I'll just say from a kind of profit corporation lens, how companies should be looking at this. Most companies are constantly looking after how can I get to double-digit growth? How can I get to triple-digit growth? And really, to get to growth, you're going to have to do a few different things. One, you're going to have to create new revenue streams. And to create new revenue streams, you need a new lens to look at things that you haven't looked at before. And that usually comes from diversity of thought. And so that means infusing into your organization new talent that has not been in your walls before, either from if your organization has been in a heavy male dominated industry and you want to break into whether you can appeal to women or gender diversity, you're not going to be able to do that with all the people that had a male dominated organization. You're going to need to have some diversity, and not just token diversity. You're going to need real diversity of thought. So sometimes it's creating a new revenue stream that you're going after. Sometimes it's creating a product that is easier to use by more people that already exist today. So if your product is for specifically a male who's 160 pounds, you're not looking at what does this mean for a disabled consumer, and does a disabled consumer use this product, whatever that product might be, the same way? And do you have people from a disabled community helping you with your design and your thinking in a way that you can't even begin to articulate because you don't live that life? So sometimes it's taking your current design and making it more accessible for whatever population you want to make it more accessible for. And then a third thing is, how can you steal market share that already exists from competitors? And that might sound a little cutthroat, but that is part of business. Is if you make a burger and another guy makes a burger across the street, how do you make a burger that appeals to more people? And how do you get more people coming in to enjoy your burger? And you haven't changed your product, and you haven't created a new revenue stream. You just need more people to eat your burger. Well, to do that, you've got to enter as many communities as you can that want to eat your burger. And to get into communities, you need to know those communities, and you need a workforce that helps you understand that community. And so those are really three ways to get to double-digit growth. To do that in a homogenous way is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with Lori more. I think that that's really important. It really makes me also think about the important role of C-suite leaders when it comes to DEI. There's the workforce issues that we have discussed, but to your point, there's also revenue issues. Chief product officer really needs to be thinking about how products are being used by a range of consumers. Different people with different lived experience can be very instrumental in initiating, designing, and testing products. This is really, really important as we think about the role of algorithms, as Rebecca has already discussed. Who's developing them, the harm that they can cause to society, particularly people of color, women. We have a DEIB certificate program at the Kapor Center. One of our instructors, Lisa Wisner, does a really great job of teaching what leaders need to understand about algorithms when it comes to the impact on different communities. Also, product design is really important when we think about accessibility for users with disabilities. As Lori just mentioned, it's really interesting because a lot of the technology that we enjoy today, voice recognition, speech to text, autocorrect, even though that can kind of be a pain sometimes. All of those were embraced and developed for users with disabilities years and years and years and years and years ago. And, have now, of course, become embraced broadly. But, these are just a few examples as we think about kind of like the role of the C-suite when it comes to DEI. Chief financial officers may be thinking about supplier diversity. Chief marketing officers may be thinking about, culturally responsive and appropriate ads, which of course is important when we think about generating revenue. Thinking about chief people officers may be thinking about launching new interview protocols and procedures to ensure consistency, improve fairness. So I just really want to underscore the really important role that all C-suiters play when it comes to advancing DEI. And to your point, attention to this can really be helpful when it comes to generating revenue for the organization.
So, as we get to the end of this discussion, I want to ask each of you the same question, which is what would you say to people who make the claim that focusing on DEI prevents potential retention of or development for existing employees? And I know that's a loaded question, but obviously this is a group of people who are very much for DEI who are speaking today. How do you respond to that? If you're someone who is pushing in your organization to make sure DEI stays at the forefront of the discussion and you're getting that claim. Lori, do you want to start us off?
Sure. So it is a tricky question in terms of how you answer it to a population that feels like expanding DEI is shrinking somebody else's pie. I believe the exact opposite, that by having DEI, you're actually making more pie. And so I just don't think it's an either or proposition. And I think that's the lens that we need to look at it. For my organization, I regularly look at our mission is to make the future of work for everyone. And that means everyone. That means we shouldn't make assumptions about what people's drivers are. So you could look at somebody who did refuse the vaccine, and you could either think it's politically motivated, but what you might find out is they have an autoimmune disease that prevents them from getting a vaccine. And I think that we need to really look at people with grace and get to know them. One of my favorite ads ever was done in the Netherlands, and it brought a bunch of people in, and they all were put in boxes. I'm in a medical box, I'm in a retiree box, I'm in a whatever box that they put these people in. And they had a box at the front of the room, and they asked a series of questions. Have you lost anyone to cancer? And a bunch of people went to the front of the room. Were you the class clown? A bunch of people went to the front of the room. And so they just did these things, and they said, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what we look like. We're all people, and we're all Dutch. And I just think how incredible that is to look at your workforce, is that the person next to you might also have a dog that is a rescue and have that same passion, or the person to your right might love literature and the kind of books that you love to read. And I think we need to look beyond these categories of less than and instead look at it from a category of the richness of having people around you that come from different experiences and different lenses and have commonalities and differences. And so I think there's way more pie, not less pie.
Cynthia, how would you respond to that question?
Yeah, I mean, I also think that it's important to think about intentions. I think that oftentimes when we hear these arguments, there is a fear or concern that somebody is taking something away from me, and they don't understand that we're really operating, and at least in my environment here in the US, we're really operating in an environment that has really been shaped by race based and gender based laws, policies, and practices that have served to disadvantage people of color and women. And oftentimes, when we are being very intentional about our DEI efforts, we're trying to be intentional of um, ensuring that we are not repeating mistakes, or I will say, are not repeating practices of the past. So I think that listening and understanding what people's concerns are is very important. And I also think that the education piece in terms of the whys is equally as important.
And Rebecca?
I think that at the end of the day, leaders have an obligation to do what is best for their companies to be successful, and to say, I'm not going to do this practice because I want, the only the people we have on the bus right now to be eligible for promotions and new opportunities would be like saying, I'm never going to negotiate any contract. I just, I always want to give our business to the contractors that we already have because, they've been here before. And so what DEI work is, it's not saying, oh, you have to hire this person and they're not qualified. Not at all. It is saying that there's so much talent in this country and there are so many systems in our workplaces that are broken and are hindering us from seeing and equitably evaluating that talent. And so when you open the aperture, the company is going to be more successful. And yes, that might mean that a role becomes more competitive than it was before because there's a greater pool of talent competing for it. But again, for a leader who is solving for their company's success, that should be a no-brainer for them.
Well, Cynthia, Rebecca, Lori, thank you so much for your time today. This has been such an interesting discussion. Thank you to LHH Recruitment Solutions for supporting this discussion. And thank you to all of you who have joined us to listen. Have a wonderful day.